I have two philosophies. One, do what makes you happy as long as it doesn't hurt other people. And two, don't try to help everybody at once. Try to help who you can and who's within your reach. If you try to help carry their load and they try to help carry your load, you have more energy and you're not weighed down, and then they can help others, and then it just is like a domino effect and it radiates outward. So instead of one person trying to carry the weight of the world, we're just helping our neighbors. We were helping our friends in our immediate circle, and if everyone does that, it radiates out.
This is Hayden, Silas, and Anhedönia. Fans know her better by her stage name and alter ego, Ethel Cain. But who exactly is Ethel Cain? In Hayden's own words, Ethel is neither a character, nor is she Hayden herself. She's more like an aspect of herself, or a concept that was created as a way of dealing with her trauma, only it was cancerous and was quickly starting to take over. So she had no choice but to sever it from herself. But she kept it alive, nurtured it, and turned Ethel Cain into a living, breathing world of its own. But what exactly separates anhedönia from her persona? We should start in rural North Florida, in the small town of Perry, where Hayden was raised, about an hour southeast of Tallahassee, where she was born. She was the eldest child, and much like Ethel, Hayden grew up in a very tight-knit Southern Baptist community, in a church-going, God-fearing family, riding four-wheelers, catching crawdads by the creek, picking sand spurs out of her feet, all the fun stuff you'd expect growing up in the countryside. From the moment that Hayden was a baby, that church was her life. Her father was a deacon, and her mother was heavily involved in the choir, and even brought Hayden along with her to choir practices, and would send her to vacation Bible school in the holidays. She would spend at least 4 days out of the week at the kids' choir and the youth group. This is what initially sparked her interest in music at a young age. She was always singing, always playing music, so it's no surprise she fell in love with it. The downside, however, was that her religion consumed her whole world. She wasn't allowed to know that anything existed outside of that church, essentially being put inside a bubble where she felt like she could see everybody else, but nobody could see her. Hayden began homeschool at age 4, along with her 3 siblings, and would be for her entire childhood. Her only glimpse into the real world she got from her grandparents, who would allow her to watch rated R horror movies with them, since she felt so scared and anxious all the time. They thought it would help. They would go to Walmart and buy Betty Crocker cakes to eat, while they watched movies like The Ring, Final Destination, and The Blair Witch Project. Hayden always felt like the odd kid out. She was treated differently by her friends' parents and was never allowed to go to sleepovers at their houses, which further made her feel so alienated as a kid. Around age 11, her relationship with her religion became difficult when Hayden began to realize that she was in the boys. She noticed that everyone in town treated one of her neighbors, who was a gay man, differently, so she started to wonder if being that wasn't allowed. Eventually, she told her mother that she thinks she likes boys, who responded by sending her into religious therapy. Hayden's teen years that followed were pretty rough. She wasn't allowed on the internet. She still couldn't listen to non-Christian music and wasn't even allowed to pick out her own clothes. Families from the other church told Hayden's mom that she couldn't play with the other kids due to her sexuality. It grew very dark and lonely. It was only through sneaking some time on Tumblr that she found a little solace through making online friends outside of her hometown and connecting with so many fandoms of artists such as Florence and the Machine, Potter, Banks, Imogen Heap, Lana Del Rey, all artists that still influence her sound to this very day. It was around this time that Hayden first started writing her own music, a little similar to what she writes now, but with a teenage mindset and less cannibalism, wanting to be loved and understood, and coming to terms with not feeling ashamed of herself. She wouldn't show anybody what she wrote during this time, not even her parents, because, well, it was about them. Hayden's sexuality became a town-wide concern. The whole community thought she was a freak and treated her like a witch. There was even grown adults who didn't even go to the same church who started to stalk their children's social media accounts. Her therapist at age 16 was the first person in her life to tell her that she wasn't going to hell when she died. Slowly, she stopped going to church at this age, beginning to resent the politics and the scriptures that they followed. Everyone in town kind of just pigeonholed her as being gay, which in her mind never really fit her. But as she got older, she discovered that there were other options and that there's a spectrum. She didn't even know what being trans was until she had read about it on Tumblr. Hayden now identifies as being a trans bisexual and thinks of herself as being spiritual in her own way, but does not consider herself to be a Christian anymore. After turning 18, Hayden quickly moved out of her parents' house and escaped the town of Perry. She got a job at a nail salon in Tallahassee, and at that time was going to school to be a nail technician, and she was finally something that she hadn't been for her entire life. Free. And for the first time, in control. In the midst of considering to enroll in the Florida State University Film School, Hayden began experimenting with making her own music in that following year, using GarageBand on an old MacBook that she got as a graduation gift and some Apple earbuds. Between 2017 and 2018, she released her work onto multiple different platforms under a couple of different aliases, such as Atlas in 2017, as well as a full album titled Colossus. In 2018, she went by the name White Silas, with an EP titled Sad Music for Sad People, along with 2 collab projects with rapper Little Treest, Nightmares, and another one in 2019 titled Morning After. This would be Hayden's final project before she began releasing work as Ethel Cain. She prefers not to acknowledge this arc in her music career though, as it was a very dark period for her and was made before she had transitioned. Her hopes of getting into film school, however, would fall through, and Hayden ultimately fell into a deep, dark hole of drugs, clubs, and meaningless sex. A hole that she eventually was able to crawl out of. And that's ultimately what separates Hayden from Ethel. Because if Hayden's story is the good ending, then Ethel's story is the result of a much worse one. If she didn't choose to forgive and forget, if she didn't choose to heal, then much like Ethel, she would have met her demise. Ethel Cain is like a mirror, the life that Hayden Anhedonia would have had if she didn't choose to get better. Sometime before her 20th birthday, she would finally start her transition after identifying as non-binary for a while, due to the fear of coming out as a trans woman after how the first time went. Hayden shaved her head bald in one final attempt to try and be the boy that her family wanted, but she never felt more miserable afterwards. On her 20th birthday, she came out publicly as a transgender woman on her Facebook. There were no more band-aids and no more secrets. Shortly after, she would get her name legally changed to Hayden Silas Anhedonia. Anhedonia meaning the inability to feel pleasure. She thought it was a pretty word, regardless of the meaning, and now she tries to live her life as a defiance of that word. In that very same week, Ethel Cain would be born. It started through a simple piano loop that she had found online, a song that would later become A House in Nebraska. After purchasing a handmade white dress from Etsy, it was as if Ethel Cain had began to possess Hayden completely. It went from gothic churches and electronic music to raw guitars and the Little House on the Prairie. Deeper, it became cults and kidnappings, serial killers, sexual violence, religious trauma, and cannibalism. The idea for an Ethel Cain screenplay turned into a full-fledged concept album, cinematic, melodramatic, and over-the-top. Everything that Hayden Anhedonia adores, the Ethel Cain universe and sound and visual, all began to take shape. This was the day that Hayden released her first single under the Ethel Cain moniker, Bruises. Later that month, she would go on to open for Nicole Dollanganger at the Beat Kitchen in Chicago as a part of her Heart-Shaped Bed tour. Adam McElwee, better known as Wiccafae's Springs Eternal, the founder of
Goth Boy Click,
saw Ethel's name on the flyer. He decided to check out her music because he thought she had a good name and was impressed by her voice and her lyrics and her branding and aesthetic and how mature of an artist she seemed to be at such an early stage in her career, with only a handful of songs at the time. Hayden released her first EP as Ethel Cain, Carpetbed, the month after, in September. In December, she released another EP, Golden Age, her final project before signing a publishing deal. Wiccafae's introduced Hayden to fellow emo rapper Lil Aaron, who runs the label Has Heart Records, in early 2020, and he introduced her to a few people from Prescription Songs. After getting laid off from her nail salon job due to the pandemic, she signed a record deal with Prescription Songs in August that includes her own imprint, Daughters of Cain. The deal came at a desperate time for Hayden. She was broke, laid off, behind on rent, and getting hospitalized because she was so malnourished. She needed the money, so signing was a no-brainer. This would lead to her releasing her third EP, Inbred, featuring both Wiccafae's and Lil Aaron, fittingly, being that those two had helped her out a great deal by this point, with Wiccafae's being featured on God's Country and Lil Aaron being featured on Michelle Pfeiffer. These 3 EPs were what began to turn her alienation into her power by translating the religious music of her youth into beautifully twisted pieces of art, detailing not so much the loss of her faith, but throwing it up after it was forced down her throat for her entire life. In the midst of everything going on during this period, Hayden was still building a project that she'd been working on in bits and pieces since she was 19. 2022's Preacher's Daughter, 13-track, 75-minute long, self-produced powerhouse, her debut album as Ethel Cain. It all started with a missing persons poster that Hayden made herself and posted all over her social media. It's nothing short of a masterpiece, with a story that goes far more in depth than what I can explain in this video. But to summarize, it follows the story of Ethel Cain, a trans-American girl who crumbles under the weight of America, and an American dream that's just impossible to achieve. Trying to be the perfect daughter, trying to be the perfect Christian, and so much of the insurmountable weight that we put on societal youth in America. We go through Ethel's struggles with feeling imperfect, being abused, facing societal standards, love, hatred, betrayal, smoked bovine hide, everything in between. She runs away from home to pursue a deluded romance with a man named Isaiah, who would eventually murder and cannibalize her. A plot quite fitting for a horror movie. At heart, Hayden Anhedonia, above all, is one thing: storyteller. And Ethel Cain is the persona that she can use as a storytelling device. She's the past, present, future. She's the dichotomy of everything that she always wanted to be, but also everything that she couldn't afford to become. Preacher's Daughter is an album, but it's also a film. It's also literature. And it's also a cautionary tale on the dark path that trauma can lead a person to. I'd like to also note that Hayden's relationship with her parents is a lot better now. They've left the church, but they still remain very religious. Her father isn't really that in touch with the music side of things, but her mother is very supportive of her art. And she sends her all of her mom-friendly music, because she doesn't really like the graphic stuff. She has a nail salon in her hometown, and shows all of her clients Michelle Pfeiffer. She loves Ethel Cain, just as much as we do.